Jamuna Tira Banachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Madhava Kunja Bihari Vishnupada Paramahamsa Parivrajikacharya Astottara Sadasi Śrīmad His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj Srila Prabhupada Ki Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Prem Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai Sri Sri Radha Krishna Gopinatha Shama Kunda Radha Kundi Giri Govardhana Ki Sri Vrindavan Dham Ki, Sri Mayapur Navadvip Dham Ki, Sri Purush Dham Chitra Ki, Sri Ganga Mai Ki Jai, Sri Chidamuna Mai Ki Jai, Bhakti Devi Ki Jai, Tulsi Devi Maharani Ki Jai, Harinam Sankirtana Ki Jai, Nitai Gaura Premanandi. Oh, glories to the assembled devotees. Oh, glories to the assembled devotees. Oh, glories to the assembled devotees. Oh, glories to Sri Sri Guru and Gauranga. Oh, glories to Srila Prabhupada. Namo Vishwadaya Krishna Stabha Lakshmana Bhakti Namane Namo Vishwadaya Krishna Stabha Lakshmana Bhaktivedanta Swami Namane Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Vicharana Nivasesha Jivadi Paschachati Satarane Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. We're reading from Śrīmad Bhāgavatam, Canto 9, Liberation, Chapter 10, The Pastimes of the Supreme Lord Ramchandra, text number 11. Right? Raksho damena vrikavad vipene samaksham Vaideharaja duhitarya payapitayam Pratravane kripanavat priyaya viyuktaha Sri Sanginam Gatimiti Pratayam Chachara Raksho Damena Vrikavad Vipene Samaksham Vaideharaja Duhit Taryapaya Pitayam Pratra Bane Kripanavat Priyaya Viyuktaha Sri Sanginam Gitimiti Pratayam Chachara Raksho Damena Vrikavad Vipene Samaksham Vaideharaja Duhitarya Paya Pitayam Bratra Bane Kripanavat Priyaya Viyuktaha Sri Sanginam Gitimiti Pratayam Chachara. Raksho Dhamena Vrikavad Vipine Samaksham. Vaideharaja Duhitarya Payapatayam. Raksho Dhamena Vrikavad Vipine Samaksham. Raja Duhitarya Payapatayam. Bratra Bane Kripanavat Priyaya Viyuktaha. Sri Sanginam Gatimiti Patayam Chachara. Raksho Dhamena Vrikavad Vipine Samaksham. Vaideharaja Duhitarya Payapatayam. Bratra Vane Kripanavat Priyaya Viyuktaha. Iti Pratayam Chachara. Ladies? Raksho Dhamena Vrikavad Vipine Samaksham. Vaideharaja Duhitarya Payapatayam. Bratra Vane Kripanavat Priyaya Viyuktaha. Sri Sanginam Gatimiti Patayam Chachara. Raksho Dhamena Vrikavad Vipine Samaksham. Vaideharaja Duhitarya Payapatayam. Bratra Vane Kripanavat. Sri Sanginam Gatimiti Patayam Chachara. Raksha Atamena. By the most wicked among Rakshasas, Ravana. Vrikavat, like a tiger. Vipine, in the forest. Asamaksham, unprotected. Vaideharaja Duhitari. By this condition of Mother Sita, the daughter of the king of Videha, Apaya Pitayam, having been kidnapped, Bratra, with his brother, Bane, in the forest, Kripanavat, as if a very distressed person, Priyaya, by his dear wife, Viyuktaha, separated, Sri Sanginam, of persons attracted to or connected with women. Gatim, destination. Iti, thus. Patayam, giving an example. Chachara, wandered. when Ramchandra entered the forest and Lakshmana was also absent, the worst of the Rakshasas, Ravana, kidnapped Sita Devi, the daughter of the king of Videha, just as a tiger seizes unprotected sheep when the shepherd is absent. Then Lord Ramchandra wandered in the forest with his brother Lakshmana, as if very much distressed due to separation from his wife. Thus, he showed by his personal example the condition of a person attached to women. Purport. In this verse, the words Srisanginam Gatim Iti indicate that the condition of a person attached to women was shown by the Lord himself. According to moral instructions, Grihe Narim Vivajayat. When one goes on a tour, one should not bring his wife. Formerly, men used to travel without conveyances, but still, as far as possible, when one leaves home, one should not take his wife with him, especially if one is in such a condition as Lord Ramchandra when banished by the order of his father, whether in the forest or at home. If one is attached to women, this attachment is always troublesome, as shown by the Supreme Personality of Godhead by his personal example. Of course, this is the material side of Sri Sangi. But the situation of Lord Ramchandra is spiritual, for he does not belong to the material world. Narayana Paro Vyaktat. Narayan is beyond the material creation. Because he is the creator of the material world, he is not subject to the conditions of the material world. The separation of Lord Ramchandra from Sita is spiritually understood as Vipralamba, which is an activity of the Hladini potency of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, belonging to the Sringara Ras, the mellow of conjugal love in the spiritual world. In the spiritual world, the Supreme Personality of Godhead has all the dealings of love, displaying the symptoms called Sattvika, Sanchari, Vilapa, Murcha, and Unmada. Thus, when Lord Ramchandra was separated from Sita, all these spiritual symptoms were manifested. The Lord is neither impersonal nor impotent. Rather, he is Satchit Ananda Vigraha, the eternal form of knowledge and bliss. Thus, he has all the symptoms of spiritual bliss. Feeling separation from one's beloved is also an item of spiritual bliss. As explained by Srila Swarupa Damodar Goswami, Radha Krishna Pranaya Vikritiya Hladini Shaktihi. The dealings of love between Radha and Krishna are displayed as the pleasure potency of the Lord. The Lord is the original source of all pleasure, the reservoir of all pleasure. Lord Ramchandra therefore manifested the truth both spiritually and materially. Materially, those who are attached to women suffer, but spiritually, when there are feelings of separation between the Lord and his pleasure potency, the spiritual bliss of the Lord increases. This is further explained in Bhagavad Gita, chapter 9, text 11. Avajananti mam mudha manushim tanamasritam parambhavam majananto mama bhuta maheswaram. One who does not know the spiritual potency of the Supreme Personality of Godhead thinks of the Lord as an ordinary human being. But the Lord's mind, intelligence, and senses can never be affected by material conditions. This fact is further explained in the Skanda Purana as quoted by Madhvacharya. Nityapurna sukha jnana sarupo so yato vibhu atosya rama ityakya tasya dukam kuton vapi tatapi loka sikshartam adukko dukkavativat antaritam lokatristya sitam asit smaraniva Gyapanartam punarnitya sambandha svatmana sriyaha ayodhyaya venirgachan savalokasya cheshvaraha pratyaksham tu sriya sadham jagamana diravyayaha nakshatra masaganitam trayodasa sahasrakam brahmaloka samam chakre samastam chitti mandalam Ramo Ramo Rama iti save shama bhavat tada savo Rama mayo loko yada ramasvapalayat. It was actually impossible for Ravana to take away Sita. The form of Sita taken by Ravana was an illusory representation of Mother Sita, Maya Sita. When Sita was tested in the fire, this Maya Sita was burnt and the real Sita came out of the fire. A further understanding to be derived from this example is that a woman, however powerful she may be in the material world, must be given protection. For as soon as she is unprotected, she will be exploited by Rakshasas like Ravana. Here the words Vaideha Raja Duhitari indicate that before Mother Sita was married to Lord Ramchandra, she was protected by her father, Vaideha Raj. And when she was married, she was protected by her husband. Therefore, the conclusion is that a woman should always be protected. According to the Vedic rule, there is no scope for a woman's being independent, asamaksham, for a woman cannot protect herself independently. Om Ajnana Timirandasya Gananjana Salakaya Chakshun Militam Jena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Mano Vishtam Stapitam Jena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kada Mahayam Tadati Svapadantikam Mukam Karoti Vachalam Pangum Langayate Garim Yat Kripa Tamaham Bande Shri Gurum Dinatarinam. Okay, so quite a few points in this purport by Srila Prabhupada. And the conclusion, right? The conclusion is that a woman should always be protected, right? There is no scope for a woman's being independent. For a woman cannot protect herself independently. How do you think about that, ladies? not very popular, especially in this day and age. Well, if only the men were so qualified that they would look after the women. Well, because the men are so ill-equipped to even look after themselves in this day and age, what to speak of anybody else, then we see a situation where the women are forced to look after themselves because the men are such predators. But according to the Vedic rule, or Prabhupada talks up here, moral instructions. Right? Vedic rule and moral instructions. And of course, the situation, most people don't abide by moral instructions, and Vedic rules don't apply in the current environment, right? Agreed? Nobody abides by Vedic rules, pretty much, right? So how can we justify independent women? Boop. You sent me a picture. I just got it. Okay. So how do we justify independent women? Can we? Something to think about. Let's go back to the beginning of the purport. So that's the conclusion. The conclusion is that women should be protected. This is a Vedic rule. Right? So the first point that Prabhupada makes in the purport is that if you're travelling, and this is an instruction for the men primarily, then you don't leave home with your wife. Right? Really what this instruction means is that if you're attached to women, attached to anything, for sense gratification, it will be the cause of suffering. Right? But especially between a man and a woman. Right? This is the epitome of attachment, right? And suffering. We become attached to each other, but then due to separation, we suffer. Which is ironic, isn't it? Because very few men can live without their wives, and very few wives can live without their husbands. Right? Even what did Lord Brahma say? Was it Lord Brahma, or was it one of his sons? Said to Lord Brahma, "What is this creation of a woman? Right? You can't live with them and you can't live without them." Right? And I guess the women could say the same thing about their husbands. So, the relationship between a man and woman it epitomizes the sense gratification of the material world, right? And so when there's sense gratification, we're happy. And when there's no sense gratification, we're unhappy. Right? What's that word? Yehi samspasa ja boga tukaya yonaya evate adyantavanta kuntaya nate shuramate buddha. Right? The pleasure that comes from the interaction of the senses with the sense objects is actually the source of dukkha, unhappiness. Right? While we're enjoying it, we're happy, but then when it's taken away, we're unhappy. This is the nature of material enjoyment. So, and this is from the material perspective. Right? Because we know, broadly speaking, very broadly, we, men and women, are like like the yin and yang. They need to be together. It's difficult for them to be apart, unless they're very spiritually advanced. Right? And so we don't discourage the combination of men and women, we encourage it. Because in the association of each other, they're peaceful. Right? Following the rules and regulations, following basically the construct of Varnashram Dharma. And enables the natural attraction and affection for a man and a woman to be properly utilized so that life is peaceful. Right? There are always going to be struggles in material existence. Right? But broadly speaking, the men and the women together are happy. Right? Separated, there's more trouble, more distress. Of course, there are always going to be those who are naturally renounced on either side. Right? And so, to prove the rule, there is a small portion of society, both men and women, who prefer renunciation and are happy with that. There are people like that, right? But broadly, we encourage marriage as an institution. There may be some sense gratification, but that sense gratification within religious principles, Krishna says, I am that dharma, following the rules and regulations. So in that situation, the men and women are broadly peaceful, right? But of course, they're always we're living in material existence, and so therefore, dukkha yonaya evate, that little bit of sense gratification will also be the cause of suffering. Right? And I don't know if you've noticed, I mention this often, but at a wedding, usually the bride and groom to be are very serious, right? And everybody else is laughing because they know the truth about marriage. It's hard work, right? Hard work. Not easy. So broadly, this statement when one goes on a tour, one should not bring his wife. One should make it simple, easy. Right? And Lord Ramchandra is traditionally given as an example in the Bhagavatam, but also in traditional Vedic or moral instructions given broadly within Hindu culture. Lord Ramchandra is given as an example of why you shouldn't take your wife when you go travelling. Right? Because it ended up being a source of great distress for him. And so therefore there's this, Lord Ramchandra is used as an example to be detached. Very interesting, Vedic culture encourages the nivritti marga, not the pravritti marga. The pravritti marga is the culture of dharma for sense gratification, right? And you can use Vedic culture and Vedic literature to justify the following of religiosity for sense gratification. Right? Elevation of the heavenly planets, good karma, cultivation of good karma. Right? But of course the Bhagavad Gita tells us, even if you have good karma, janma mrityu jara vyadi, the material world is still a place of suffering because of birth, death, old age and disease. And so better than looking for good karma and elevation of the heavenly planets where it looks like you live forever and enjoy forever, better to follow the nivritti marga, which is that we should finish our business in the material world and leave it. Right? Nivritti marga. And so the concept or the notion or the understanding of the relationship between a husband and wife is, yes, there's some material comfort and material benefit, but the use of that material comfort and benefit is ultimately to finish off our material existence, both husband and wife. And so the relationship is there will be some attachment, right? Some affection and some attachment. Otherwise, if there's no affection and no compatibility, then married life is hell. It already is tough enough. But the engagement in these activities from the devotional point of view, from the bhakti perspective, is that we engage in these activities with a degree of detachment. Right? There's a finely tuned balance. Because what often happens with neophytes is, the husband or the wife suddenly decides they're going to be a renunciate to the shock of the other partner. What are you doing? And then they neglect the emotional and the devotional side often of the relationship. So it's a very finely tuned balance of renunciation, but of affection and support and comfort. Right? it's always nice to have friends when you're feeling a bit down. Have you noticed? No, you're all tapasvis. Purely atmarama, right? Sustained by oneself, self-realization. Huh? Why sadhu sangha is so important? Because we need to have the association of friends and companions and support from others. Yep. So detachment is encouraged, right? But within the construct or within the confines of what we've got, what Prabhupada says is Vedic culture, but actually within Krishna consciousness is bhakti culture. And bhakti culture is higher than, it may embody the Varnashram principles, but actually it's higher. No? So even though we may be following the moral and the Vedic codes, at the same time within bhakti we're cultivating friendships and support and encouragement based on bhakti principles, devotional principles. Right? So it's very interesting that Prabhupada talks about, he quotes this, Grihe narim vivajai et, from the material point of view. But then he says, this is the material side of Sri Sangi. Right? This is the material side. And we're all encouraged, don't be attached to anyone or anything for sense gratification, what to speak of your wife. Right? So that's the material side. But the situation of Lord Ramchandra is different because it's spiritual. Right? So when the devotees come together, we take a material relationship and we convert it into spiritual. Make sense? So the relationship between a husband and wife can be most important and most supportive of spiritual engagement. Otherwise, why get married if it's all material? Yeah. But it's not. That doesn't mean that our activities are the same as Lord Ramchandra, right, on the spiritual platform. But, as Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, if we're engaging in these activities in the spirit of devotion, according to the sadhana practice of a bhakta, then it's not material, it's spiritual. So, analysing the environment or the situation that Lord Ramchandra found himself in, how is it explained by the Acharyas? So Prabhupada says, Lord Ramchandra is Narayana Paro Vyakta, beyond the material creation. So it appears that the Lord has appeared as a king. And it appears as Sita has appeared as a queen. Right? And Prabhupada further explains it, quoting the Bhagavad Gita chapter 9, text 11. And he says, avajananti mam mudha. What does that mean? Mudhas, fools, don't understand the spiritual activities of the Lord because he appears just like a human being. Right? So materialists see the devotees, they see they're married, they're having children, they've got jobs, and they think, oh, just like us. Materialists, right? They're not spiritual. Actually, it used to be like that when I joined ISKCON. If you were a brahmachari or a brahmacharini, you were a devotee, right? If you were married, you were in Maya. Right? All the household, well, there weren't very many householders. You weren't allowed to associate with the householders because they were in Maya. But it's very interesting. Lord Chaitanya encouraged his household disciples. If the sannyasis, and certainly the sannyasis, if there was some deviation or some distraction, they were heavily punished. Witness who's the example? Chota Haridas, right? Yeah. And Chota Haridas's fall down was pretty minor, comparatively speaking, minor, but he was banished. But Lord Chaitanya was always inquisitive. How are you? How's your family? How's your children? And encouraged the householders, because the householders' activities within the Grihastha ashram, it's an ashram. It's a place of spiritual shelter. So, similarly, not the same, but similarly, Lord Ramchandra's separation from Sita Devi is not under the jurisdiction of the material energy, but it's under the jurisdiction of the Hladini Shakti, which is also a feminine aspect of the Lord's energy. Right? Krishna is described as being like the powerhouse. Right? And what comes out of the powerhouse? Anybody like to say? What comes out of the powerhouse? Huh? Energy, yes. Go to the top of the class. Yes, energy. It's called, what's it called? Ooh, no. What's it called? What comes out of the powerhouse? What's it called, Sibya? Electricity, yes, electricity. We can measure it. Right? We measure it. We've got these smart meters on our outside of our houses that measure all of the energy that we draw from the powerhouse. Right? So it's interesting. Krishna he's understood as the source of all energy. Right? We were discussing this the other day. So he has his external energy, the material energy. There's the marginal energy, that's us, the living entities, and then there's the internal or spiritual potency, Antaranga Shakti. The living entity can be under the influence of the spiritual or under the influence of the material energy. Right? All ultimately controlled by Krishna, who's the powerhouse. He's the source of all energy. Right? And Prabhupada, in that verse that we were studying the other day, Prabhupada makes a point. Just like out of electricity you can get heat from a heater or ice from a refrigerator, the energy can be used to give or to provide different results. Right? Comes from the same source, but engaged or employed differently gives either heat or cold, or in our case, spiritual influence or material influence. So, Krishna, whenever he appears, in this case appearing as Lord Ramchandra, he's never under the influence of the material energy. Right? He can appear within it, but Prabhupada gives the example, it's like the king, when he goes to the prison house, he's not there because he's a prisoner. Right? When the king comes to the prison house, the jailhouse in charge opens up the door and lets him in. It was his prison. And when he wants to leave, out he goes. He's not subject. He enforces the law and puts the miscreant citizens into prison, but he himself is not obliged to follow the rules and regulations that are part of the prison house, which is Durga, by the way, in the material world. Durga is in charge of the prison house, and she keeps all us in the prison house very neatly imprisoned, right? By sense gratification, basically, or by the... So, Lord Ramchandra and his pastimes are all under the influence of the spiritual energy, even though manifest in the material world, which is very interesting. And so Prabhupada describes here in the purport how the separation of Lord Ramchandra from Sita is spiritually understood as Vipralamba, under the influence of the Ladini Shakti, belonging to the Sringara Ras, belonging to the conjugal rasa. Right? So in order to heighten the feelings of attraction and affection, the Ladini Shakti sometimes creates a situation where the lover and the beloved are separated. You know, there's that saying, absence makes the heart grow fonder. Have you heard that? Yeah. So when we're separated from something that we have a strong attraction or affection for, our feelings of affection are enhanced by that separation. So when we see a beloved friend after some time, our affection for that friend has increased because we've felt the separation. Right? So And that's naturally experienced in a relationship between a husband and a wife. Assuming that they're appropriately matched. Right? Otherwise they won't want to see each other. Even after separation they'll be thinking, boy, that's good. Right? But not good, usually. Usually not good. That's why, there needs to be some sensible calculations made in matching. We choose our friends because they're friends. We don't willingly embrace or engage with those who we're not naturally attracted to. Where even Krishna says, I'm equal to everybody. Samoham sarvabhuteshu. I'm not envious of it. I'm not an enemy of anyone. But I like my devotees better than the others. Right? Why? Because they show affection. There's a natural affinity. And when there's a natural affinity between people, then naturally affection arises. And if there's no affinity, then we're neutral. But that's okay, because neutral relationships are valid. In a neutral relationship with Krishna is described as being valid, right? Does that make sense? Yeah, it's okay. So long as there's service, right? Now, but it's interesting here. Then it's described. In the spiritual world, the Supreme Person, and keep in mind that when Lord Ramchandra comes into the material world, it's still the spiritual world. The Supreme Personality of Godhead has all the dealings of love, displaying the symptoms called sattvika, sanchari, vilapa, murcha, and unmada. Thus, when Lord Ramchandra was separated from Sita, all these spiritual symptoms were manifested. Interesting. Huh? Now, what are they? Sattvika. No, I couldn't remember all of these, to be honest. Sattvika bhavas are involuntary physical manifestations of intense spiritual emotion, right? Arising from pure goodness and love of Godhead. So what are some of the examples? Tears, trembling, standing of hairs on end, fainting. Was Lord Ramchandra showing some of these symptoms? Feeling separation from Sita? Yeah. Change of bodily colour, choked voice, sweating, becoming stunned, right? Or what was the next one described here? Sattvika sanchari, right? Sanchari. These are fleeting emotional states that arise and subside, nourishing the permanent mood of love, sthayi bhava. Each devotee has a relationship with Krishna which is steady, but sometimes that steady emotional state is, things bubble up. Right? It's like, we have we all have a friendship with Vijay, but when we eat his pizza, we go, oh, yes. Examples: jubilation, sorrow, no pizza. Fear, everybody else has eaten the pizza. Anguish, I didn't get enough pizza. Wonder, how did he make it? How does he do that? They act like waves in the ocean of devotion, intensifying and enriching the devotee's loving relationship with the Lord. Right, so we see this, Rupa Goswami describes these relationships and the emotions that arise as a result of those relationships, scientific, in categories. Now here especially, what was Lord Ramchandra experiencing? Vilapa, right? So what is vilapa? Lamentation, right? So this is a spiritual emotion. Previously described, don't take your wife into the forest, it'll create distress. Or let's say broadly, don't be attached to material enjoyment because it'll cause you distress. Right? But here, we're seeing Ramchandra in distress, but Prabhupada saying not material, purely spiritual. Here, Vilapa refers to lamentation or wailing. So Vilapa means what? A word that starts, a two-syllable word that starts with a C. Crying. Good. Yes, crying. Lord Ramchandra is crying. Right? And so he could be reprimanded. Don't cry. This is just for attached materialists. Don't be a baby. Right? Could be. But no, it's not a material emotion. It's a spiritual emotion. And so he's crying because of his feeling separation from Sita Devi. Right? Not under the influence of the material energy, but purely under the influence of the spiritual energy. It's very interesting. When Madhavendra Puri was in his final days, he was crying, meditating on the Lord's, Radharani's separation from Krishna, right? And his disciple Ramchandra Puri said to him, don't cry. What was it? What's that verse that Ramchandra Puri was quoting? Prasanatma. Brahma Bhuta Prasanatma. Na sochati na kanchati. Right? On the transcendental platform, Prasanatma, one's peaceful. Na sochati na kanchati. One neither hankers nor laments. So he's saying to his guru, be peaceful. And Ramchandra Puri was immersed in the gopi bhava, or the mood of separation that the gopis were experiencing in their separation from Krishna. Not a material emotion, but a spiritual emotion. Right? And so what was his response to Ramchandra? Was it Ramchandra Puri? Get out of here. I don't want to ever see your face again. Right? Whereas Ishvara Puri was chanting the verses that enhanced Madhavendra Puri's meditation on Radharani's separation from Krishna. So they're celebrating and relishing the Vipralamba Bhava. because that's an indication of a measure of the deep affection that the devotees have for Krishna, not some material hankering or lamentation. It looks like it's material affection or lamentation, but because, as Prabhupada says here, Narayana paro vyaktat. Narayan is not of the material world. He's purely of the spiritual world. Even if he appears in the material world, he's in the spiritual world. And so that's why Prabhupada quotes this verse, Avajananti mamudha. Manushim tanomasritam. The foolish, the materialistic mudha can't understand my appearance in the material world under the spiritual energy because it looks like it's under the influence of the material energy. It looks the same in a human form. What is it? Manushim tanomasritam. That I've taken the form of a human being. And so therefore I'm subject to the laws of material energy. No. And so, vilapa, right? Crying. In devotional drama and poetry, vilapa is expressed through sorrowful words and actions, reflecting the pain of separation and the depth of longing for the divine. Right? And then the next item, murcha. What's murcha? Means fainting or loss of consciousness, often resulting from overwhelming spiritual emotion. We see that especially in Lord Chaitanya. Especially in Lord Chaitanya. Relishing, and Radharani, because Lord Chaitanya is relishing the mood of separation, the Mahabhava of Radharani. Right? In the highest states of love, devotees may faint due to the intensity of their feelings, such as during moments of union or separation with the Lord. Who experienced this with Lord Chaitanya? Lord Chaitanya's topmost associate. Who was that? R.R. Huh? R.R. Ramananda Roy. Ramananda Roy. Bhavananda Roy was a great devotee of Lord Chaitanya, and he had 3 sons. The eldest son was Ramananda Roy. Bhavananda Roy, even though he was the father, considered himself to be subservient to his son, Ramananda Roy. Right? So when Lord Chaitanya and Ramananda Roy embraced, they both fainted. When you embrace your friends, do you faint? Not usually. Right? So just see the deepness and intensity of these, what are they called? Again? Divine emotions. That's what they are, divine emotions. When we're separated from our wives, when we meet, we don't faint. Rasa Krishna, do you faint when you meet your wife? You've been to India for a few weeks, you come back, and you both faint. Right? We experience similar emotions, but not to the depth and intensity that we see in the relationships between the eternal associates and Krishna. Right? The gopis curse Lord Brahma, right? Because their eyes blink. Why did you make such a faulty vehicle, right? Why did you make such a faulty contraption that when we're with Krishna, our eyes blink and we lose sight of him? Right? That's inconceivable. These are inconceivable. Achintya. Right? Achintya. We can meditate on them and we can absorb our thoughts in them, but to understand them, unless we're influenced by the same degree of spiritual Shakti, like I was saying before, Krishna is the source of all energy. He's the powerhouse. And out of him comes Bahiranga Shakti, Tatashta Shakti, that's us, and the Antaranga Shakti. We have to be deeply, deeply absorbed in and immersed in, pretty much, the spiritual potency, the spiritual energy to experience these kinds of emotions and to understand them. And here's the last one, Unmada. Unmada. What's that? What's mada? Mad. Like I was saying the other day. Or it's interesting. Bratra means brother. Tuhitra means daughter. Right? Very similar. If you look at the construction and the sounds that come out. Like in Tuhitra, in daughter, there's actually a H. Right? Dohutta. Tuhitra. Very interesting. Where does that come from? Obviously it comes from the Sanskrit, at least that's my speculation, right? So, mada, unmada must be deep madness, right? Unmada is a state of divine madness or spiritual intoxication where the devotee's behavior appears irrational due to overwhelming love for God. Now, the interesting thing is that Krishna, even though he's the source, he's the powerhouse, he actually can be, he's never influenced by the material energy, but the internal spiritual potency is designed in such a way so that it actually can affect him. Right? And so we see that's the Ladini Shakti, right? His pleasure potency. So in order to enhance his relationship with Mother Sita, with Radharani, with all of the devotees effectively, sometimes the Hladini Shakti and the Leela Shakti combine together to create separation, and then when there's separation, these symptoms manifest. But they're not materially what's the word? They're not material influences, they're purely spiritual. And they enhance this mood that Prabhupada says here, vipralamba. And it's interesting. Why vipralamba is important for us, we see. Lord Chaitanya, we see Mayapur Dham in our temples. We see Vrindavan Dham. And most often, not always, but most often, Jagannath Puri or Purushottam Kshetra, right? And Purushottam Kshetra is the place of separation. That's the mood that Lord Chaitanya relishes in his final years in the Gambhira, in Puri. Right? So that's kind of the epitome of Sankirtan takes us into Vrindavan, but then the height of Vrindavan is that mood of separation. Interesting, huh? Which is our culture. Our culture is to ultimately develop that mood of or being pure enough to relish that mood of separation, as is experienced by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and as is experienced by Madhavendra Puri or even Srila Prabhupada. But the interesting thing is, how does Srila Prabhupada manifest that Vipralambha Bhava? How does he do it? Following the instruction of his spiritual master. And so that mood of separation is manifest in preaching effectively and always remembering his spiritual master. That's the connection, right? And occasionally Prabhupada would be overcome by these spiritual emotions. But broadly speaking, and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu as well, didn't discuss Vipralambha Bhava and these spiritual emotions in public settings. Right? Didn't. That's why he spent the time in the Gambhira and only with devotees like Ramananda Roy. Ramananda Roy, Sikhi Mahiti, right? And Sikhi Mahiti's sister. So Lord Chaitanya experienced that Vipralambha Bhava, but it's private. It's not public. You rarely see Prabhupada exhibiting these sattvika and other symptoms. Occasionally, right? You know, the devotees were trying to work out what's Prabhupada's relationship with Krishna. And did Prabhupada tell them? No. Just gave some hints. One time when one devotee made a poem for his Vyasa Puja and described Prabhupada as a cowherd boy, right? And Prabhupada said, she's very intelligent, right? And you can see some of Prabhupada's poems. There's that poem, what is it? Markine Bhagavata Dharma. And Prabhupada mentions there that he wishes to be in Vrindavan playing with Krishna in the fields of Vrindavan. Right? So very, 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 you know, a hint maybe. Right? But not for the public. Not for the public. So, very interesting. The Lord Ramchandra. So the first warning is, don't be materially attached. Don't go into the forest with your wife, because it'll create trouble. And of course, Lord Ramchandra's example is there plain to see, and that's used as an example in traditional Hindu culture. Look at Lord Ramchandra, he's the Supreme Personality of Godhead, but look at the trouble he created for himself because of attachment. But that's somewhat superficial, right? The real lesson and the real, the example of Lord Ramchandra's manifestation of ecstatic symptoms is under the auspices and under the direction and under the protection of the spiritual energy. And it's all purely to enhance his relationship with Sita. And also to, Lord Ramchandra's mood is that of adherence to religious principles, to Dharma, from a moral, very much a moral and Vedic viewpoint. That was his example. Because it occurred to me this morning when I was having a shower, and last night also, if the association with women is so detrimental, how come Krishna is surrounded by 16,108 wives and unlimited gopis? Don't try to understand that from the material perspective. Impossible. Has to be understood purely from the influence of the Ladini Shakti, the pleasure potency of the Lord. And of course, Krishna was also crying because the gopis, Radharani was giving him the cold shoulder. But that enhances that vipralamba bhava, that mood of separation, and enhances the mood of affection ultimately. So, and Prabhupada explains here, quoting Madhvacharya and the Skanda Purana, that because the argument or the question arises, well, if this is the activity of the Ladini Shakti, the spiritual energy, how come Ravan, the big demon, stole Sita? How could that happen? If it's all purely under the influence of the spiritual energy, how come the demon, at least momentarily, appears to conquer the spiritual energy? How come? Right? And of course, Lord Chaitanya discovered the explanation when he was on his tour of South India. And Kurmakshetra, was it? I think, in South India, and he discovered the Shastra where it explains that when Ravan stole Sita, the real Sita wasn't taken. The shadow, it was just a shadow of the real Sita was taken, and of course was then purified in the pastime of Sita's returning to Lord Ram, and she was purified, or as a consequence of entering into the fire. The shadow Sita was burnt up and the real pure Sita came out. Highly esoteric. Right? It's a very esoteric understanding of things. But that then supports this understanding of the spiritual nature of the relationship between Ram and Sita and the feelings of affection, that even though it appears to be lamentation and symptoms of disturbance, they're actually symptoms of highly elevated spiritual love and affection. And on the last point, how is it that independent women are protected? You didn't hear what I said the first part. How they're following in the footsteps of the previous acharyas, they're following in the footsteps of their guru. So in that context, especially in Kali Yuga, the men are not qualified to look after the women. Very often. Not always, but very often. But an independent woman, often due to circumstances, taking shelter of the spiritual master, taking shelter of the bhakti process is not independent and is protected by Krishna, and so can be respected. From the Vedic and the moral perspective, X. But that's not how we judge people. We judge people from the spiritual perspective. So how much a person is dedicated to Srila Prabhupada and to their spiritual master, if they're not initiated by Prabhupada, then they're protected by Krishna. There's a higher level of protection. And so, from the material perspective, like Prabhupada's saying here, a woman should always be protected. Right? But in this day and age, the men are such dastardly rascals, they exploit the women. They don't protect them. And so the women are forced to be independent effectively, right? By circumstance. But if they take shelter of the spiritual master or spiritual masters, right? Vande Gurun, then they're still protected. Right? And that protection is higher than, the protection of a husband. Of course, the husband, a good husband and a good wife, are both spiritual practitioners, and so they protect each other based on the spiritual culture, not the material culture. And that's what we emphasize. Spiritual advancement over material position. Right? That's why Chincharupa rang you up the other day. Right? One of her friends was complaining, why is because there were devotees wrote appreciation of Gopavindesha's book. Right? And one of Chincharupa's friends was saying, how come your name is before these sannyasis? Huh? And Chincharupa was a bit, not totally bewildered, but a bit concerned. And I said, it's because they are junior to you. You've been a devotee, you were initiated in at least one case, you were initiated before they were born. Right? And so it's very interesting, you see, when Lord Chaitanya asked Bhavananda Roy who was superior, he or his son, how did Bhavananda Roy reply? He said, my son is senior to me, because he was more spiritually advanced. Right? And so in our bhakti culture, we measure spiritual advancement not because, you're a woman at the back. Very interesting, right? We recognize, okay, in some social settings, yes. But in a devotional culture, we measure advancement by seniority and also by service, right? Quantity, yes, and quality, yes, service, right? Seniority. So, here's my suggestion. If a Chincharupa is telling you off, you better wear it. Because by devotion, she's senior, right? And she's also matrivat, right? She's a mother, right? So senior. Interesting, huh? No, she should be behind the sannyasis. No, she can actually tell the sannyasis what to do if she's senior. Interesting, right? Not some silly Varnashram construct, which ultimately by Ramananda Roy was what? Rejected. Right? And even his father recognized that. His father didn't say, I'm superior because I'm the dad. The father understood the spiritual culture and said, I'm junior to my son because he's more spiritually advanced than me. Interesting, huh? This is all under the influence of the spiritual energy, which is ISKCON ultimately. The ISKCON is all under the influence of the spiritual energy. Okay, we do make adjustments broadly for our external engagement with the external world, which is why why Srila Prabhupada and Lord Chaitanya didn't openly manifest symptoms of bhava and ecstasy, in public. It's done internally in private. But we should never forget the importance of spiritual potency over material. Hare Krishna. I rattled on a bit today, but it was a very interesting purport. Very interesting purport. And yeah. Spiritual culture. And we're all feeling separation from Vijay's pizza. There's also spiritual culture. But also it could be the source of suffering. Material suffering. If you eat too much, that's against spiritual principles. Okay. Thanks everybody. Śrīmad Bhāgavatam ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Gaura Bhaktivedanta ki jai.